from deep love to a shocking conclusion. A surprising event in Punjab. The sudden disappearance of a young woman during a warm summer evening stirred deep concern throughout a quaint town in Punjab. Her absence left a trail of unresolved mysteries and lingering questions. Jazz, as she was fondly known, appeared content just days before vanishing, her life seemingly filled with promise. Yet, unknown to those around her, a darker, more threatening reality was brewing beneath the surface. In 1994, Punjab, a town woven with narrow lanes and the vibrant hum of rickshaws, was caught in the grips of an unusual disturbance. Among its inhabitants was Sukhwinder Singh Sidhu, affectionately known as Mithu. To many, especially the town's youth, Mithu was not just an ordinary rickshaw driver, but a local icon. His infectious energy, athletic ability, and mastery of Kadi, a demanding local sport that emphasizes agility, strength, and cooperation, made him a celebrated figure. As the captain of his team, Mithu's name was synonymous with leadership and vigor. That year, something pivotal shifted Mithu's focus from his daily routines. Jaswinder Kaur Sidhu, or Jazz, arrived in John in November to stay with relatives. A serene and introspective young woman, Jazz was accustomed to a quieter existence. Despite her reserved nature, she quickly became intrigued by tales of Mithu, the revered athlete and rickshaw driver, whose exploits were a common topic among the locals. Curiosity about this well-regarded man grew within Jazz. Though she had no initial intentions of meeting him, destiny seemed to have other plans. On an ordinary morning while waiting at the rickshaw stand with her mother for a ride to the market, Jazz was unaware that the day would be far from typical. As they stood there, a rickshaw halted before them. The driver was a young man with a piercing gaze, Mithu himself. Recognizing Jazz immediately, his face brightened with a spark of recognition. Jazz and her mother boarded, settling into the back seat with other passengers. As they journeyed through John's constricted lanes, Mithu frequently caught glimpses of Jazz in his rearview mirror, an unspoken connection quietly unfolding with each passing street. Each fleeting exchange of glances between them seemed inconsequential, yet lingered in their thoughts long after. Mithu, typically absorbed in his duties, found his attention irresistibly drawn to the quiet girl seated behind him. For her part, Jazz was equally aware of his gaze. It made her feel a mix of self-consciousness and intrigue that she couldn't quite shake. She resisted the urge to look his way, but their eyes eventually met, and in that shared moment, a faint, unspoken smile passed between them. It lasted only a heartbeat, but its impact was undeniable. As the rickshaw rolled to a stop, Jazz and her mother stepped out. Before walking away, she glanced back, catching Mithu's gaze once more. This time it held longer, speaking volumes in its silence. An accidental encounter, yet one imbued with meaning neither fully understood. Throughout the day, Jazz carried the memory of the rickshaw driver with her. The way his eyes had reflected curiosity and warmth stayed imprinted in her mind. Mithu, too, found his thoughts returning to the quiet yet powerful interaction. It was as if they had exchanged more than just glances. Something deeper had passed between them, sparking a connection neither could articulate. That moment marked the beginning of a journey, though neither knew what lay ahead. As night fell over John, Mithu returned home after a demanding day. Fatigue settled in, and he retreated to his room for some much-needed rest. However, his brief respite was interrupted by urgent cries from outside. "Somebody, please help us!" The voice carried a sense of urgency that jolted him into action. Mithu rushed out to find two young women stranded by the roadside. To his surprise, one of them was Jazz, the girl who had occupied his thoughts all day. Their scooter had broken down, leaving them helpless and anxious. Without a moment's hesitation, Mithu approached, his demeanor calm and reassuring. Offering to help, he bent down to inspect the scooter. Jazz watched him intently, her earlier curiosity about him deepening with every gesture of his kindness. Mithu worked diligently, his hands moving with practiced precision. After several failed attempts, he identified the problem and managed to get the scooter running again. A wave of relief washed over the girls, and Jazz couldn't help but smile, her gratitude evident. Mithu's actions spoke louder than words, solidifying the impression he had already made on her. What had started as a chance encounter now felt like a fateful connection, one that neither could ignore. Jazz was deeply grateful for Mithu's help, but communication between them proved challenging. Jazz spoke only English, while Mithu communicated exclusively in Punjabi. Fortunately, Jazz's friend stepped in as a translator, bridging the gap and allowing them to exchange a few meaningful words. Mithu soon learned that Jazz was staying with relatives just 15 minutes away from his home. At 22, Mithu was energetic and spirited, and Jazz, at 19, was equally vibrant. The connection between them was unmistakable. The next evening, Mithu couldn't suppress his desire to see Jazz again. Boldly, he went to her relative's house, fully aware of the challenges this posed. Her family was highly traditional and would not tolerate uninvited male visitors. To avoid detection, Jazz quietly snuck out to the window to meet him. They held hands and whispered to each other through the window, their communication stilted by the language barrier, yet infused with a profound connection. Words seemed almost unnecessary. Their bond transcended language. Jazz's life, however, was far from free. Born in India, she had moved to Canada with her parents, settling in a large home shared with extended family members. Her world was governed by strict rules and constant scrutiny from her parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Every action was monitored, and she was expected to adhere to traditional values where respecting elders and following family rules took precedence over personal freedom. A reserved and dutiful young woman, Jazz remained deeply rooted in her cultural heritage despite living in Canada. While many around her embraced Western customs, Jazz stayed steadfastly connected to Indian traditions. She shunned parties and preferred quiet, family-focused evenings. Education was her highest priority, and her disciplined lifestyle reflected her dedication to both her studies and her values. In 1994, Jazz traveled to India with her mother, Malkiat Kaur, to visit family. They stayed with her grandparents, prominent landowners whose influence was well known in the region. Their sprawling estate and elevated social standing highlighted the family's wealth and importance. The Sidhu family also owned a thriving business in Canada, further cementing their reputation as one of the most prominent families in both countries. Within the Sidhu household, decisions were governed by Jazz's uncle, Surjit Singh, who held absolute authority. Surjit Singh was a commanding presence in the Sidhu family. His word was law, and everyone followed his authority without question. Mithu, on the other hand, came from a humble background. He grew up in a small village called Xiong, where his parents worked as farmers. Life was far from easy, and Mithu learned the value of hard work early on. After finishing high school, he immediately took up work to support his family. His reputation for honesty and dedication earned him respect in the community. Driving a rickshaw wasn't lucrative, but Mithu took pride in his independence and did everything he could to provide for his loved ones. When he discovered that Jazz belonged to a wealthy and influential family, a sense of unease crept in. The stark contrast between their social statuses was undeniable, yet it didn't deter his growing feelings for her. Jazz, for her part, cared little about such differences. She admired Mithu for his kindness, sincerity, and unwavering determination. Their relationship blossomed in secrecy, hidden from Jazz's family, who would have vehemently opposed her involvement with a poor rickshaw driver. Yet, Jazz remained undeterred by societal expectations or her family's potential disapproval. To her, Mithu's character mattered far more than his financial standing. As Jazz's departure back to Canada loomed closer, an overwhelming sadness consumed her. The thought of leaving Mithu behind felt unbearable. In a bold and desperate move, she tore up her passport and fabricated a story about losing it. This bought her an additional 20 days in India while a replacement passport was issued. Her family was furious, but they had no choice but to accommodate the delay. During those precious extra days, Jazz and Mithu spent as much time together as possible, cherishing every fleeting moment. Their bond deepened as they realized the depth of their feelings for each other. In January 1995, Jazz finally returned to Canada, but their relationship didn't end with her departure. They found ways to keep their connection alive across the distance through letters and phone calls. Jazz wrote her letters in English, while Mithu replied in Punjabi. With the help of friends who translated their messages, they managed to bridge the language gap. Determined to strengthen their bond, Jazz even began learning Punjabi to communicate more easily with Mithu. Their phone calls were brief, constrained by the high cost of international calls, but each conversation was treasured. Despite the challenges, their love persisted, defying distance and cultural barriers. For 4 long years, Jazz and Mithu maintained their connection, fueled by dreams of being reunited. By 1999, Jazz's family returned to India with plans to arrange her marriage. Her uncle, Surjit, had already chosen a groom for her, a wealthy landowner in his 60s. When Jazz learned of the match, she was horrified. The idea of marrying a man several decades older than her was unimaginable. Meanwhile, Mithu held on to the hope that their love could overcome the insurmountable barriers between them. Their relationship remained a closely guarded secret, as Jazz knew her family would never approve. The consequences of her relatives discovering her feelings for a poor rickshaw driver could be catastrophic, and she feared for Mithu's safety. Desperate, Jazz confided in an aunt she trusted. "If I can't marry Mithu, I'll die without him," she admitted with tearful resolve. Moved by the intensity of Jazz's emotions, her aunt agreed to help. On March 15, 1999, Jazz and Mithu married in a private ceremony at a gurdwara. No one else was present, and the union remained a secret. Afterward, Jazz returned home as if nothing had happened. Her arranged marriage to the older man was initially postponed and later canceled altogether. During the next 2 months, Jazz stayed in India, meeting Mithu in secret whenever possible, acutely aware that their relationship, if exposed, could lead to severe repercussions. When the time came for Jazz to return to Canada, she made a heartfelt promise to Mithu that she would come back to him soon. They continued to communicate despite the challenges. Mithu even managed to install a phone line at his home, making it easier to stay in touch. Their connection persisted, but the happiness was short-lived. In early 2000, Jazz's relatives in India discovered her secret marriage and informed her parents. The revelation triggered an immediate and explosive reaction. Jazz's mother and uncle were furious. They confined her to her room, cut off her access to the phone, and isolated her entirely from any means of contacting Mithu. What had once been a story of love and resilience now turned. A few days after the confrontation, Jazz's mother, Malkiat Kaur, approached her with a surprising change in demeanor. She claimed that the family had decided to support her relationship with Mithu. With a warm smile, she assured Jazz that they would plan a grand wedding in India and even assist Mithu with obtaining a visa to move to Canada. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, Jazz believed her mother's words, convinced that her love story was finally receiving the blessing it deserved. Soon after, Malkiat asked Jazz to sign a stack of documents explaining that they were necessary for Mithu's visa application. Trusting her mother completely, Jazz signed the papers without hesitation, including several blank sheets. What Jazz didn't realize was that those blank sheets would later be used to fabricate a damning statement against Mithu. The statement falsely claimed, "I, Jaswinder Kaur Sidhu, declare that Sukhwinder Singh Sidhu, also known as Mithu, kidnapped me, assaulted me, and forced me into marriage at gunpoint. I escaped to Canada at the first opportunity." These fraudulent documents were submitted to the police in Punjab, leading to Mithu's arrest. He was charged with kidnapping, coercion, and illegal possession of a weapon, accusations that turned his life upside down. Mithu spent several harrowing months in jail awaiting trial under these fabricated charges. His family endured immense hardship both financially and emotionally as they struggled to cope with the stigma and challenges posed by the accusations. Meanwhile, back in Canada, Jazz continued to write letters to Mithu, but she received no responses. Her calls went unanswered, leaving her increasingly anxious and confused about what could have gone wrong. As time passed, Jazz's growing unease turned into a painful realization. Through mutual acquaintances, she eventually learned that Mithu had been imprisoned. The shock of the news was compounded by a chilling suspicion. Her own relatives were behind it. Recalling how her mother and uncle had tricked her into signing the papers, Jazz began to piece together the truth. Their earlier assurances of support had been a carefully orchestrated ploy to sabotage her marriage and destroy Mithu's life. The situation was far worse than she had imagined. The false accusations hadn't only targeted Mithu, 2 of his relatives and 2 friends were also arrested as alleged accomplices. These individuals had no connection to the marriage, but they were dragged into the ordeal to apply pressure on Mithu and his family. What began as a tale of love and resilience had turned into a nightmare of betrayal and injustice. Jazz refused to give up on Mithu despite the overwhelming challenges. She eventually managed to contact him by phone, but the conversation was fraught with tension. Mithu, deeply hurt and angry, accused Jazz of signing the documents that had led to his arrest. Through tears, Jazz tried to explain how she had been deceived, her trust cruelly manipulated by her mother and uncle. She confessed that she, too, was a prisoner of their control, confined to her home and forbidden from contacting anyone. Determined to make things right, Jazz found a way to escape her relatives' oppressive grip. It is believed that her father, despite his struggles with schizophrenia, and her brother played pivotal roles in helping her break free. With their support and assistance from Canadian authorities, Jazz managed to leave her family's home and return to India. Once in Punjab, she sought justice, pleading with local police for Mithu and the others' release. Jazz gave a formal statement declaring that none of the accused were guilty, and affirming that her marriage to Mithu had been entirely consensual. After thorough investigations, the authorities verified her claims, and Mithu, along with the others falsely implicated, was finally freed. Overwhelmed with relief, Jazz vowed to remain in India, promising Mithu she would never return to Canada. Aware of the potential danger posed by her relatives, the couple decided to live in hiding to protect themselves. In June 2000, Mithu took Jazz to his uncle's house, hoping she would feel safer there. Just a few days later, on June 7th, they received a phone call from Canada. Mithu's uncle answered and heard the familiar voice of Malkiat Kaur, Jazz's mother. She asked to speak to her daughter. Jazz approached the phone warily, sensing something amiss. Her mother's tone was unexpectedly gentle. "My dear, what have you done? But it's okay. None of that matters now. The most important thing is you're happy. We want you and Mithu to be together and celebrate your wedding in style. I've taken care of everything, so don't worry." Mithu, however, felt uneasy. The sudden change in her mother's attitude seemed insincere. Shortly after, the phone rang again. This time, Malkiat's tone was sharp and hostile. She demanded to speak to Mithu directly. "You'll pay dearly for what you've done," she threatened. The call escalated when Jazz's uncle, Surjit, joined the conversation, his voice brimming with venomous threats. Mithu and Jazz realized that the danger they had feared was far from over. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. There will be consequences." These words rang in Mithu's ears as he silently hung up the phone. He didn't want to alarm Jazz, but a heavy sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew that their happiness was fragile and danger lurked just around the corner. A few days later, Jazz suggested they go to the market to buy a dress for a celebration they planned to attend on June 12th. Mithu hesitated, his worry for their safety making him reluctant, but Jazz's enthusiasm was infectious, and he eventually agreed, hoping it would be a quick, uneventful trip. On June 8th, the couple set out for the market. Jazz selected a dress while Mithu paid for it, and they stopped at a cafe for coffee before starting the journey back home. However, trouble soon found them. Their scooter began breaking down repeatedly, forcing them to stop and seek help from a mechanic multiple times. Each delay added to Mithu's growing unease. By the time they were back on the road, night had already fallen. Despite the setbacks, they tried to make the most of their time together, unaware of what lay ahead. Late that night, Mithu's parents received devastating news. Their son had been admitted to the hospital in critical condition. There was no word about Jazz's whereabouts. At the hospital, Mithu was unconscious, fighting for his life. Hours later, he regained consciousness and, after receiving medical treatment, was able to give a statement to the police. Mithu recounted the terrifying events of that night. On their way home, he had noticed two men trailing them on a scooter. Not wanting to alarm Jazz, he kept quiet, hoping the strangers would eventually lose interest and leave them alone. For a while, it seemed they had. But as they neared home, a car suddenly swerved in front of them, blocking their path. 6 men emerged, their intentions unmistakably violent. Mithu stopped the scooter, confused and wary. Before he could react, the men pulled out wooden sticks and began their assault. Mithu fought desperately to defend himself and protect Jazz, but they were outnumbered and overpowered. One of the attackers struck Mithu in the head with a heavy blow, knocking him unconscious. Assuming he was dead, the attackers dumped his body into a roadside ditch and fled. What had happened to Jazz during the chaos, Mithu didn't know. Hours later, workers passing by discovered his unconscious body in the ditch. They immediately called for emergency medical assistance, and Mithu was rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. The Punjab police quickly launched an extensive search for Jazz. On June 9th, the day after the attack, her lifeless body was found not far from where Mithu had been left in the roadside ditch. Her body bore multiple deep wounds, the most devastating being a fatal injury to her neck. The police contacted her relatives in Canada for identification, sending photographs of the body. Surprisingly, neither Malkiat Kaur nor Surjit confirmed that the body was Jazz's. Suspicious of their denial, Mithu, along with his parents and friends, came forward to identify her. Heartbreakingly, they confirmed it was Jazz. Adding to the mystery, Jazz's Canadian relatives neither attended her funeral nor claimed her body. Their strange behavior raised suspicions with the police, who intensified their investigation into her murder. During their search for suspects, the police detained a local troublemaker, Anil Kumar. Upon questioning, Anil confessed to his involvement and revealed a startling detail. Days before the attack, Inspector Jaginder Singh had approached him, offering money to carry out an assault on Mithu. Both Anil Kumar and Jaginder Singh were promptly arrested. Under interrogation, Jaginder Singh disclosed that the plot's mastermind was Darshan Singh, Jazz's uncle, who lived in Punjab. Darshan had promised to pay 3 lakh rupees, approximately $4,000 USD, for Mithu's death. Despite this revelation, one haunting question remained. Why was Jazz also harmed if Mithu was the sole target? Anil Kumar provided chilling answers. After the attackers assaulted Mithu and left him for dead in the ditch, they forced an unconscious Jazz into their car and transported her to a remote farmhouse. When Jazz regained consciousness, she immediately demanded to know what had happened to Mithu. The attackers coldly informed her that he was dead. Upon hearing this, Jazz became enraged and defiant. Anil claimed they then called Malkiat Kaur and handed the phone to Jazz. Her mother instructed her to return to Canada, but Jazz refused. Furious at what had been done to Mithu, she vowed to expose the truth, declaring she would not remain silent. At this point, Surjit took over the call, attempting to calm her down, but Jazz would not be pacified. As Jazz remained under the control of the assailants, Malkiat and Surjit discussed their next steps. The perpetrators pressured Jazz to make a false statement against Mithu and agreed to return to Canada, hoping to salvage their plan. However, Jazz stood firm, adamantly refusing to comply. Her resistance enraged the attackers, escalating their aggression. Jazz's refusal to betray Mithu and her determination to expose the truth ultimately led to her tragic fate. Anil Kumar contacted Malkiat Kaur again, informing her that Jazz had refused to comply with their demands. According to Anil, her mother coldly gave consent for them to take care of her. Surjit Singh reportedly agreed to increase the payment, offering an additional 3 lakh rupees, approximately $4,000. Based on Anil's confession and Inspector Jaginder Singh's testimony, police arrested 11 more individuals, including Darshan Singh, Jazz's uncle, who had orchestrated the attack from Punjab. Meanwhile, in Canada, Malkiat Kaur and Surjit Singh emerged as primary suspects in the murder plot. The case led to legal proceedings in both India and Canada. Investigations revealed that Malkiat and Surjit had masterminded the plan, directing Darshan to eliminate Mithu. Darshan had recruited Inspector Jaginder Singh, who then hired Anil Kumar and his accomplices to carry out the attack. By October 2005, 11 of the 13 accused were convicted, although some were later released on bail. Anil Kumar, Inspector Jaginder Singh, and Darshan Singh received significant prison sentences. However, Mithu's troubles were far from over. After being discharged from the hospital, Mithu found himself facing fresh allegations. Authorities accused him of illegal possession of a weapon and involvement in dealing banned substances. Additionally, a woman came forward with claims that he had attempted to coerce her into a relationship. While these accusations appeared baseless, Mithu spent another 4 years in prison before ultimately proving his innocence. During his imprisonment, Mithu endured relentless threats from Jazz's family. They attempted to bribe or intimidate him into retracting his testimony, offering money and land as incentives. Despite the constant pressure, Mithu stood firm, refusing to compromise the truth. For years following the crime, Malkiat Kaur and Surjit Singh lived freely in Canada, evading justice despite mounting evidence against them. In 2014, India secured an extradition agreement for the two, but lengthy appeals allowed them to remain out of custody for several more years. At the time, Malkiat was reportedly working at a waste processing plant, and Surjit served at a local temple in Canada. In 2012, a guilty verdict was officially issued against them, but the judicial process dragged on for years. By January 2019, Punjab police made an effort to arrest Surjit Singh, traveling to Canada to apprehend him. However, they were briefly detained and later released on bail. To this day, the case remains unresolved, with justice for Jazz's tragic story still elusive. It has been 24 years since this horrific crime was committed, yet justice remains elusive. The case lingers in legal limbo, with a final judgment still pending. Anil Kumar and Inspector Jaginder Singh continue to serve their prison sentences, while Darshan Singh, Jazz's uncle, managed to convince the court of his innocence. Following his acquittal, Darshan disappeared, and his whereabouts remain unknown. Since their return to India, Malkiat Kaur and Surjit Singh have avoided public scrutiny, refusing to interact with the media or provide any statements about the case. Their silence only deepens the mystery surrounding their role in the tragedy. Meanwhile, Mithu, left devastated by the loss of Jazz, the love of his life, has dedicated himself to seeking justice. He has never remarried, instead channeling his energy into clearing his name and exposing the truth. Despite years of court battles, countless obstacles, and persistent threats, Mithu's resolve remains unshaken. His fight is not just about vindication for himself, but also about honoring Jazz's memory. Through his relentless pursuit of justice, Mithu embodies resilience, refusing to let the weight of injustice break him. This story stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of control and manipulation over others' lives and the arduous, often slow-moving path to justice. It underscores the power of resilience, determination, and standing firm in the face of adversity. Mithu's fight for dignity and truth serves as a testament to the strength of the human spirit even in the darkest of times.